We are here with Scott Woodard, the brand manager for the Savage World of Flash Gordon, and we're going to be talking about a couple of things. We're going to be talking about Scott's start as a designer, how he got involved in macro game design, specifically working with Pinnacle and on Flash Gordon as well. We're going to talk about some of the design elements that came up in the original Flash Gordon core rules, because we didn't have Design Corner back when you wrote them. And then we'll be specifically talking about designing pulp adventures for Moons of Mongo and all of the stuff that's come up since. And then we'll kind of do questions throughout and at the end. So, Scott, how'd you get your start as both designer and writer are, I think, fair game?
Well, far back in the annals of history. No, I mean, the writing thing goes back literally decades. When I started writing for Warner Brothers and Disney and these big corporations as a writer-producer. And then that started to turn into far more exciting writing when I started writing scripts for audio dramas and things like that. A lot of people know me from my Doctor Who work and things like that. So that sort of happened in the past, which
we'd be remiss to not mention the recent Doctor Who thing.
That was crazy. So yeah, the very first audio that I wrote, which was a Doctor Who story for Big Finish Productions in the UK, it was a sixth Doctor story, Colin Baker, Daleks, the whole Davros, called The Juggernauts. And just recently, Radio Times over in the UK did a big poll to vote to, I guess they called it, crown the top sixth Doctor audio adventure. And I came in number 3 out of 82. So, and there was a worldwide poll. So pretty exciting stuff, actually, especially for something I wrote literally 17 years ago. So it's crazy how that stuff comes around. So yeah, so
that's gotta.
What's that?
I was gonna say that's got to feel good. I look at stuff I wrote last week and I'm like, God, I should really stop doing this. Having your stuff hold up over 17 years is impressive.
Yeah, it's kind of amazing. So yeah, that was a nice bit of exciting news that came along right as we were launching the Flash Gordon Game On Tabletop campaign. So last week was a big week for me. But I'll skip through a few things. So yeah, I did a bunch of that stuff. I was still writing for Warner Brothers, still writing for Disney. Wrote these audio adventures, wrote a handful of those. And then I started actually in the gaming industry as a copy editor. I started actually editing for a few different companies, Triple Ace Games, which used to be I'm not sure what the status is now because, of course, I don't know if anybody knows the story, but Paul Wiggy Wade Williams has some health issues over the last few years, and he sort of was the headliner at that company. But I edited a ton of stuff for them. And then I actually did some work on Deadlands Noir and Hell on Earth, primarily as an editor. And then the next thing I knew, I got to know Shane really well, and he offered me the Sixth Gun. And so I wrote the Sixth Gun based on the comic from Oni Press, and really had a great time with that, and wrote a whole bunch of other supporting material for it. And then lo and behold, that led right into an offer to write Flash Gordon, which was pretty exciting for me because Flash was definitely an IP I grew up with. When I was a little kid, I was watching those old serials on Saturday mornings in my hometown, the old Buster Crabbe serials. And then, of course, I'm an old dude, so so I watched like the old Filmation cartoon and read the comics, and I just totally dug Flash Gordon. And so when he offered it to me, it was really sort of one of those dream come true opportunities that I leapt at. So I've had a lot of other side writing projects in the process, but that's sort of the quick journey up to where we are now.
Yeah, so the Grasshopper says he loves your treatment of the Sixth Gun.
Oh, thank you. Thank you very much.
And he asked the I think a very popular question when this stuff comes up, because they are quite different mediums. But so how do you find writing for a medium like audio translates for gaming, as the players don't do what a character would do often enough that there are many jokes out there for that?
Oh, that's interesting. I mean, they're wildly different, but at the same time, there's a lot of crossover. Of course, we do write dialogue in a lot of gaming content. There is the dreaded box text that some people love it, some people hate it. But it does give us writers opportunities to sort of flex our dialogue skills. So I'm very comfortable with that, but at the same time, and this is something that I always like to share just with aspiring writers, whenever you're writing anything, and my day job, by the way, I work as a copywriter for a company that manages rental vacation properties around the world. So it's not very exciting, but you'd be amazed at how much crossover there is there. That's a topic for another time. But everything that I write and everything that you write, I highly recommend reading aloud. And I think everything, if you can get to a point where what you're reading has the pacing and structure of dialogue, I think it's a win. And it doesn't necessarily work for everybody. But when I look at like my role-playing game writing, especially something like Flash Gordon, which this is jumping ahead a little bit, but writing that game was not only writing a role-playing game for gamers, I also wanted to write something that appealed to Flash Gordon fans. And I knew that there would be fans reading these books who had no idea what a role-playing game was, no idea what Savage Worlds was. So I needed that stuff to still be entertaining, even when I was talking about game mechanics or how a Mongo Tech piece of equipment worked. So that's one of the things where I've seen a lot of that crossover. So writing a script or writing role-playing games, there actually is a bit of crossover, certainly for me. It's a great question.
Well, and I've not personally written a lot of stuff that then goes to a voice actor to be written, but I have a little bit of experience that, and I personally find that of writing, okay, here's the script, and I'm going to hand it off to some other folks, and they're going to, either voice act it or screen act it, versus, okay, I'm going to write something, and I'm going to hand it off to somebody else, and then they're going to go interpret it and play it and make it their own. I find those processes are actually fairly similar in that it's being the writer on anything is still a collaborative effort, and the people that get it after you've left it all get to have their own active creation and their own interpretation on it.
Yeah. And then going all the way back to when I was writing promo copy I was writing and producing promos for Kids WB. So if anybody grew up watching Kids WB, I worked for that network, 10 years with that network. You saw a lot of my work there. And most of that stuff, I was writing dialogue for, there you go. I was writing dialogue for announcers and voice actors. So that's sort of how that all happened to then get me into writing Doctor Who and Dark Shadows and other scripts. But all that stuff, those little bits and pieces I pulled from all the way up to writing Moons of Mongo, which has dialogue in it, which has a couple of unique new characters delivering dialogue that still feels like it's in the Flash Gordon universe. So yeah, it's really sort of getting inside the head of not only your characters, but also inside your actors, which again will be your players or your game master, who's going to be potentially doing silly voices behind the screen.
Yeah, absolutely. And honest, I think a good place to start with the Flash Gordon stuff is actually based on a question that we got on Twitter from Justin Edgar. With so many variations on the Flash Gordon mythology and pop culture, how do you choose what to keep and what to skip for the RPG? Because I imagine that was probably where you had to start when it came to writing the RPG.
Yeah. So when we first got it, I knew that it wasn't just me. It was mostly me. When I first got it, it was the main focus was going to be on the comic strips. That's where we were going to get sort of our inspiration for imagery and just for the world building itself, because it's really interesting when you read those comic strips to really see how it starts very, very small, relatively crude, and then just expands into this incredible, really well-defined universe. And then even when Alex Raymond steps away from it and hands it over, the reins over to like Mac Raboy, I always forget how to pronounce his name, but no one's going to criticize me on that. And then he goes off into space, and the world just keeps building, and the universe keeps building and building. So starting with the comics, which I felt like there was more than enough there, but no, that's not the way my brain works. So I realized I'm writing this game, and I need to appeal to Flash Gordon fans of all stripes. The only caveat I had from the outset was we should probably avoid too many direct references to the 1980 movie. And it was just mainly probably because it was going to be tied up with, I don't know if Dino De Laurentiis, I don't know if the studio even exists anymore. It just felt like there was probably too many claws in that IP, that property, rather, that iteration. So I started with the strips, and then I began to move up chronologically. So it went strips, Radio serials, I listened to them all. Film serials, I watched them all. I took copious notes. The 1950s Flash Gordon German-U.S. co-production, do not recommend, but I know it has its fans. If you think the Buster Crab serials are low budget, you got to watch those. Then let's see, what would have come next? The 1970s novels. There's 6 novels that I highly recommend if you're a Flash Gordon fan. And I did pull stuff out of those. So there's little bits and pieces. There's a couple creatures that were described in the books that found their way into the RPG. The cartoon, which I mentioned earlier, the Filmation animated series. If you've never seen it and you dig Flash Gordon, watch the first season. Don't watch the second season where they introduce this little pink dragon named Gremlin. Yeah, I said
we need to make this more kid friendly. Make up a new character. That's on high from the executive to the writing team. What are we gonna do?
By the way, I have statted up Gremlin, but maybe someday I'll share that. Let's see. So then it would have been the Filmation series. And then, I did dip into the 1980 movie. Now, because there are definitely direct references in the books. I mean, not just the logo itself, which was designed for the film, and we knew we had to use that logo. But there are things in the film that crept into the RPG. Not to say that we filed the serial numbers off, but we tread lightly with some of that stuff.
Right.
I mean, you couldn't have Flash Gordon without mention of the boar worms. I mean, we had to have stuff like that. So I pulled from a variety of things. Notice I'm not mentioning the sci-fi channel.
I was going to ask, because that was my first exposure as a kid to Flash Gordon, was that 2008 sci-fi series.
It is a thing. It does exist. They did their own thing with it. And so it didn't really fit in with sort of the it would have been really difficult. We would have had to push a lot of stuff to make that all work. So I just skipped it. And I also skipped the cartoon where he was a skateboarder from Earth. And Ming was green. Weird. So honestly, I pulled from almost everything. And then some comics, but not new publishers' comics, because every publisher of any Flash Gordon comic took the IP and just did their own thing. Most of them reinvented the mythology in some way or another. So it was really difficult to try to even tap into some of that storytelling. But that's it. I mean, I really pulled from everything.
Right. Well, and that brings up an interesting point that I think is a different place where the RPG sits versus, like another studio picking it up or, Sci-Fi Channel. All of those folks, they're not trying to allow you to live in the thing that you fell in love with, like we are with the RPG. They're trying to say, what is our version of Flash Gordon, right? They're recontextualizing it for their day and age and for their sensibilities and for the things that are important to them as storytellers versus the things that folks fell in love with. I think it's often very true of sometimes reboots happen because this is something that transcends the ages, but you want to kind of update it and give the next generation their version of it. Other times it gets a reboot because, there's just too much money behind this name, but these people don't want to tell that story. They want to tell their own story, but the only way anybody give them the money to do it is to use the existing name, which is, I think, the furthest you can get from when you're, doing, we've got a number of licensed RPGs, between Flash Gordon and Solomon Kane and even Pathfinder to a certain extent. We're not trying to make our own version of what you fell in love with. We're trying to let you experience the thing you fell in love with in a different medium.
Absolutely. Yeah. And again, going back to my original desire to write something that would appeal to pretty much every type of Flash Gordon fan, I've had people message me who have found little things I've dropped in there, little Easter eggs from the most obscure places. I mean, yes, there are even references to Ted, but I'm not going to tell you where they are. But that just shows you how all-encompassing that the game is. And even though it sounds like it's just coming from so many places, it is. But I had to then take all that and stick it into a funnel and make sure that what came out the other end felt like one cohesive universe.
I mean, to the extent that the the comic panels that we have on the Game On Tabletop page, they're kind of like, here's your little bit of preview, which are pulled from the RPG. I was asking Scott about those, and he was like, "Oh, well, I know this obscure Spanish translation where they have color versions of these panels," and I'm like, "That's why you're the Flash Gordon guy."
It's fun. I mean, this is one of the neat things about writing a game is why, I don't know, I'm trying to think of the right term, as encompassing and as massive. I mean, we're talking about 85, 86 years worth of, 87 years worth of IP here. And at the end of it, I can with full confidence tell people that I am now a Flash Gordon expert. And it's like, I was a fan, now I'm an expert. And in the same way, it was like with the Six Gun. I started out really loving the comic, but by the end of it, I knew that thing inside and out. And that's one of the joys of working on role-playing games, especially when they're based on licenses. I mean, a lot of people are like, licensed role-playing games, I'm going to run the other direction. But I love doing it. I've worked with licenses for years. So for me, it was great because there's just so much work has been done for you. And I don't know, I had a great time doing it. And the great thing is King Features, as far as I know, were pretty much hands off. I mean, they own Flash Gordon. And so we were able to just sort of run with this stuff and come up with these wild and crazy things. And it was nice to be working for a license, which pretty much said, go for it. Just have a great time.
There's a fair amount of trust that has to go into that for a license to be like, just whatever you guys are going to come up with, we're good with it.
Yep.
But everybody heard it here first. When they invariably do a anniversary documentary of Flash Gordon, I expect to see Scott Woodard called up to be a talking head on that documentary.
I will answer that call in a heartbeat. I would love to.
So as a reminder for the folks tuning in, especially if this is your first Design Corner, you can throw out questions throughout the entire time. Sometimes, like we've already done with some of Grasshopper's questions, we pull them in. But if we don't get to your question, we will always go back at the end and trawl through and make sure that we hit everybody's questions. So feel free to answer throughout. Don't worry, like you have to save them all for the end. But so there we have kind of, the elephant in the room of the body of Flash Gordon content that there is to pull from. Well, the thing that I'm supremely interested in, and you can kind of, when you open up the Flash Gordon RPG and you look at what are the new setting rules and things like that, right? Like the planetary romance stuff. What are the elements that you have to introduce to, like Savage Worlds is a broad rule set, but we have to go in depth on specific things and tropes and rules when we do a new setting or whatever, because that setting has things that are important to it. So what were the most important elements that you really had to put the magnifying glass on for Flash Gordon? And how did you decide what was the thought process behind the rules and design decisions that you made to magnify those elements?
Well, I mean, the nice thing is that going into it, Savage Worlds is kind of designed for Flash Gordon. I mean, there's no question. I mean, it's been fast, furious fun from the outset. Little side note, very early on, when I first got the gig, I put together a teaser poster. We never did anything with it, but it said Flash Furious Fun. But anyway, that was something I was really pushing. But Shane was like, no, that's okay. So it was really.
I think I found that somewhere in Dropbox.
I'm sure it's in Dropbox. But no, the thing was, it was like, okay, so we've got Flash Gordon, we've got Savage Worlds. This is a round peg. This is a round hole. I mean, there was no question. We didn't have to file any edges off. It was just a matter, just drop it in, and let's now come up with a few things that we can tack on that'll make it feel even more Flash. That was where we created the cliffhanger setting rule, which is now it's in Suede. It's a thing. As far as I know, right? Yeah, it is. It's insane.
I think so.
I think it is. But
there's so many different things that we end up reading, and it's like, I imagine this whole time during Flash, it's like, oh, we did something like this in this other book. Go and look at that book.
Yes.
And then you have no idea where anything comes from anymore.
Yeah, if it starts to sort of meld together a little bit. But certainly the cliffhanger idea was, I mean, that's from the serials. That is that. I mean, in a weird way, the serials took it right from the comics. If you look at the original comic strips, you're going to see that things always end on a crazy cliffhanger. Next week, it's Flash in the mouth of danger or whatever it is. So we needed to figure out a way to make that work. We didn't really have that for Savage Worlds at that point, but now we do. And of course, we wanted to also not necessarily have it so that it just falls into the game master's hands, but also to give the players ways to get out of it. So that's kind of how we put that whole thing together. I think it works great. If you've ever had a chance to run with the cliffhanger setting rule, it's a blast. Let's see what else. Yes, planetary romance. So planetary romance, by definition, it doesn't really mean what we made it mean. So I know we've had people say, well, planetary romance is more of a genre, but I think in the context of Flash, it works so great to call it planetary romance, and I think people dig what we're doing with it. But reading the Flash Gordon comics, it's astounding how often characters fall in love with other characters and just start throwing themselves at each other. Somewhat to comical effect. I mean, you basically have, and of course, Flash himself gets a lot of that, but so does Dale. And then this has been explored over the years. I mean, there's a lot of that stuff that happens. So we figured, why don't we just have at the outset there is going to be a character at some point who's probably going to fall head over heels for one of the players. And it works to great comedic effect. I mean, but still within the tone of Flash Gordon. So those are definitely two that really stand out for me, that are 100% Flash Gordon, but 100% compatible with Savage Worlds. And I was really happy with how those worked out. And we also did a cliffhanger supplement early on, where we introduced, we discussed how cliffhangers work in the strip, how they can work in your game. We did the cliffhanger cards and the token. If you got the original, or actually if you still get the core box, which we are offering on Game On Tabletop, you get this epic brass rocket-shaped cliffhanger token, and it's heavy, it's a beast. You put that on the table, and everyone wants to grab it. So,
let me double check real quick, because just so folks know, that is a limited reward tier. We only have 50 for the campaign, and 12 are gone. So if you want to get that brass pin, the Champion of the Wild Planets tier, which gets you the original limited edition box set. It gets you the Legends of Mongo booster box, so you basically have everything Flash Gordon. I think the only thing that's not in those two boxes that you also get is the cliffhanger specific rules supplement. So if you ever want that pulled out from elsewhere, and then also that brass pin. But only 38 of those are remaining. But if you see this stuff and you haven't gotten any of the Flash Gordon stuff and you want everything in one place, just get the whole line as cheap as possible. It's that pledge tier. I have to see about getting one of those pins for myself if we have any left over after the.
Well, it's not really campaign. A pin. I'll clarify. It's good. It's like four. I wish I could grab my boxes on the other side of the room there, but it's a big, hefty, double-sided brass. It's almost like a plaque. I mean, there's no way to describe it. You got to see it in person. It's beautiful. I think we have pictures of it, and of course, our funded logo is based on that design. So you get an idea if you look there. Which was
an interesting challenge to try and reverse engineer the original mock-up file and then get that font working and then get the gradient working. I imagine I could have asked somebody and been gotten a more original file that was easier to work with, but it
works.
Newsflash, folks. You spend a lot of time in Photoshop working on print games if you're doing the marketing for it.
I'm doing that as we speak, actually. So yeah, we wear a number of different hats when we work on games. That's for sure. I was also just flipping through the book again, and the other thing too that we really sort of put into Flash Gordon early on was conviction, and that's definitely one that has made it in the Adventure Edition. So yeah, if you're familiar with the way conviction token works, you can, in a weird way, thank Flash Gordon. That's the thing too, is that Flash Gordon, I tend to think it's 85% Savage Worlds Adventure Edition. It's really close. There were a few things that I mean we still clung to, I guess. Like charisma. Charisma is still in the core books. But of course, when you get the conversion document, it tells you how to pull all that stuff out and make it work.
Yeah.
But we tried a lot of we experimented a lot when we worked on Flash Gordon, and I think it was, as far as I know, it was the last setting to come out before Adventure Edition came out. So if I'm not mistaken, I think it's true. I think that's correct. So a lot of the testing, in a weird way, was done in Flash. So it's very close. So people are always asking, how much is there to convert? Not too much. Not too much.
It's the conversion document is 3 pages, and I think 2 of the pages are just here's the entire stat block, because I think with the ripping out of a few things, it's slightly differently laid out.
Right.
But when you read the section that's like, here are the rules that you need to change, it's like, change the name of this. Don't use charisma. The everybody gets a D4 base in the core 5 skills, right? But it's incredibly easy to transfer over and use with Suede. Well, and that's something that I think, you hit on it earlier, right? Savage Worlds is for pulp adventures. It's, I think the most common parallel that I make myself and other people make is, it's the Indiana Jones style adventure. Well, if you go and you talk to a guy named George Lucas about what inspired him in his making of Indiana Jones, he talks about watching the Flash Gordon serials in the movie theater.
Oh, yeah.
So for folks that are young like me but don't know the history, when back in the 30s, 40s, 50s, and so on, when Americans went to the movies as often as we watch TV now, and it was the national pastime, that movie theaters just constantly played, and you would sit down and you would start watching whatever was on the screen at that moment. And if you would show up, if it was before the movie that you wanted to go to was, or oftentimes you didn't even know what movie was playing when, and so you just sat down, started watching something, and at some point you left. And that's where a lot of the Flash Gordon serials got really popular. I think for the same reason that cliffhangers became this natural element of Savage Worlds. It's something that you sit down, you start watching. You don't really need to know a whole lot of background for it to get what's going on, because the themes are fairly universal. And then they always end on a cliffhanger, so you always want to come back and watch some more, right? And watching them in order was something that was almost impossible to do, right? In this same example, George Lucas talks about the reason he started in the middle of the story is because he would sit down in the theater and he'd be in the middle of an arc of Flash Gordon. So that kind of format, which I think is why it did so well in theaters, and then why earlier it did so well in comics, because it leveraged that same, let's always leave it on a cliffhanger because you're going to come back the next time you buy the newspaper and read the next comic, is also why it's so great for role-playing games. Because you're going to come back and play next week, but if you don't have something that you're kind of biting your teeth on throughout the entire week leading up to game night, you lose out something that is just baked into the bones of Flash Gordon. And because Savage Worlds is the pulp adventure setting, that's why it's a peanut butter chocolate scenario. Yeah,
it's also, I think, with Flash, and I've actually seen game masters do this. A lot of game masters will start their Flash Gordon adventures in media res. So it's literally starting out with, okay, the cliff is collapsing. You're like, what cliff? It's like it's happening, and you're just going to go right into it. And it works beautifully. And little side note, George Lucas tried to get the rights to Flash Gordon. He was going to do Flash Gordon, but instead wound up doing Star Wars. So little trivia there for you.
So we talked about some new rules stuff, and I'm going to betray some of my own ignorance. I'm not terribly familiar with Kingdoms of Mongo, but I think, to my understanding, Kingdoms of Mongo is primarily, it's a source book, right, as opposed to a rule book like the core rules. Did you guys introduce anything new rules wise into Kingdoms of Mongo?
There are a few things in there. I mean, I know we added stuff that was unique to the individual kingdoms. So I believe it might be Tropica has cave surfing, which is kind of a fun thing. So yeah, if you want to basically fly a hoverboard, you're going to want to pick up Kingdoms of Mongo, because that's going to have some rules in there for that. We had a few other things like that. If trying to remember some of the other ones off the top of my head that I'm just drawing a blank. But it's a great source book to have anyway, because you're still going to get, more monsters, a bunch of Savage Tales. Right. You get so much additional content. So, but there were a few new things in there, new weapons, new gear.
Yeah, so that leads kind of to the thing that when I think of Kingdom of Mongo, this is my understanding of it. It is, you've got just a book full of, okay, here's, the things that you need in a role-playing game that you don't need when you're, writing a story or shooting a film or doing a cartoon, which is, you don't need all that information that goes with how does it function, right? When they're writing when they're originally shooting or writing Flash Gordon, they don't need to worry about what does the underlying society look like. Whatever you shoot's on screen, that's the only thing the audience gets to deal with. I think, is it David Mamet? No, it's not David Mamet. Is it Aaron Sorkin? I forget who says the character is born when they walk onto screen and they die when they walk off.
Right.
I forget whose quote that is off the top of my head. I
don't remember, but I've heard it.
But in the role-playing game, you don't have that luxury because your players live through every single bit. So what was the kind of, I'm curious as to that process of having to zoom in and show a lot more of existing on Mongo than we would typically see in the serials or the movies or the comics. What was that process like, and how did you pull out, what was interpretation versus finding something that they originally established?
Thankfully, a lot of time and energy was spent in the comics on developing various kingdoms, and then we also saw them developed in other media as well. So I had a lot of notes. There's one document I would love to share. I'll just show it to you. I mean, it's obviously I'm not going to read it or ever post it online. Well, maybe someday. But when we wrote Kingdoms of Mongo, one of the things we really wanted to do was bring other writers in. So that one is very collaborative. It's amongst some very well-known writers, certainly in the Pinnacle universe. But what I needed to do was to get all of them on board, and so I created this 6-page. It's basically a top secret document from the Department of Intergalactic Defense, and it's 6 pages of individual kingdoms that I wanted to have covered. Anything highlighted is specific to the comics and where the authors could find the information. And so I banged this thing out. It was sort of a good teaser to show the highlights of that particular kingdom, and then also they could pull whatever they wanted out of the strips. Couple other references to stuff I pulled out of the novels and things. But what I really wanted then to do, the authors to do, was take that little seed and just go for it and create their own stuff within the context of each individual kingdom. So just like any of the stuff that I wrote, yes, it's rooted in actual source material, but there's tons of stuff in there that's out of this crazy brain. And the same thing goes for Kingdoms of Mongo. So yeah, we did elaborate and sort of run with some of these ideas, as long as they fit within the context of Flash Gordon universe and also the kingdoms as established. Some of them were barely mentioned. We had very little information about certain kingdoms. Radiuma is not particularly well covered, but I wanted it covered because there's a whole nother storyline in the comics where they go back to Earth, and basically Flash brings Mongo technology to Earth, and they start building new war machines and stuff. Incidentally, one of my dream proposed projects that I came up with very early on was a Flash Gordon's Earth supplement. I would love to do that. I would love Teller to write it, actually, because it would be so heavy on military stuff. So yeah, so some had lots of material to draw from, some did not. But I think when you go through the book, you'll see how well fleshed out it is, and how it, like I say, it really fits into the universe as established in all the various iterations. But yeah, so that's how that all worked.
and I think something that cannot be underplayed, and I've seen this a bunch in my career as a designer, but if you noticed, maybe if you'll hold it up one more time real quick, on the document, right? Like the fact that it is presented, right? The presentation of that document, even though it's something that it's just other authors that should get it, right? They're designers and writers. They know what it's like to work with somebody else's stuff. They should be able to just pick it up, right? You could have given them, a bunch of scratch on the back of a napkin. They should have been able to do their job.
Right.
But you gave them something that felt right, that looks right, that is in of itself thematic. And that's something that, especially for any folks that are newer designers, a hard learned lesson, but one that I think every designer ends up learning, is that the way you present something to anyone is the way that they're going to get it. And so it doesn't matter if it's another designer who should be able to see the skeleton of the thing and get excited for it. If you present them something that looks awesome and is in the theme and gets them in that motion the moment they're reading it, then the thing that they make is going to be that much better for it.
Definitely. Yeah. Along those lines, since we were talking about kingdoms, I wanted to share this really quickly. So over the years in the comics, they would present little symbols that would pop up on uniforms and thrones and walls, and Alex Raymond just loved coming up with this stuff so that it was all linked to each kingdom, and you can see there's 7 of them here, and some of them are pretty well known. The Arborea one in the middle there is pretty notable. There's even a Lion Man one over in the corner right there, which I think you see once. And of course, me being me, I came up with 5 more that didn't exist, because I thought, well, what a great thing. We should totally use these symbols when we do the Kingdoms of Mongo book. We could put them on each like opening page. This is what was going through my head early on. We never used any of them. We never used any of them. But yeah, again, it's that whole thing of, I wanted this sort of cohesive package I could just hand over to our artists or our layout people and say, hey, let's use these symbols. But we just had no place to put them. But that's just sort of when I write, especially when I'm running a role-playing game where it's so much world building, I'm a maniac, because if I start, I'm serious. When I start writing something, if it's about, I don't know, I can't even think of a good example. I'll start to pull pictures. I always have my sort of murder board, which a lot of people will go for, and I have just loads and loads of reference photos so that I know that this thing is based on a ziggurat that exists in some part of our world, but I want to make sure that it feels right when I'm writing about it in Flash Gordon. So a lot of it is. I have a Bible, basically, that I could put together that probably looks like a showrunner's Bible for a TV series. Maybe at some point I'll scan all this stuff and put some kind of a cool document together that people can look at, sort of the secret files of the development of Flash Gordon. But for now, they're just sitting quietly on the side, and but I'm very proud of it. It's quite an accomplishment.
That's one of those things that I think game design in general is very bad about, is like, I absolutely want you to scan those now just so that you have a backup somewhere. Because okay, yes.
And this is that's the tip of the iceberg.
Right. But like, there's so much work that as designers and writers we end up putting into this stuff. Like you said, you become an expert in the thing that you're trying to do, because if you're an expert in it, it becomes so much easier to convince somebody else that world is real and these things make sense, and that the logos you come up with are exactly what the original artist would have made when he was doing the comic strip. And I think it's so weird that we often we just keep all that stuff to ourselves so often, because there's a little bit of that, like, well, I don't want people to see too much how the sausage is made, because then they start to believe in it a little bit less. But definitely I want to at some point see those documents, because I absolutely love stuff like that. And that's why we do this, so that we have a little bit of opportunity to show them a little bit of the sausage.
And before we move on, we're probably going to wind up talking a little bit about Moons of Mongo and stuff, but our map is another thing that I'm very, very proud of. And if you're a Flash Gordon fan, of any stripe, this map is pretty familiar to you, because it was done by Arlene Williamson, who was the wife of the artist who was doing the comics in the 60s and 70s, actually. And what's kind of amazing is, I remember we posted this map online, and I had some hardcore comic fan come out and say, oh, they stole the map. And I said, no, first of all, look in the bottom corner, and it says, based on the work of Arlene Williamson. So we absolutely give credit to Arlene for doing the first map. The thing was, though, is that when she did her map, she left a lot of stuff off. And so that was another fun little thing. where do all these missing kingdoms fit? Where do these little places that Flash has visited in 1943 in the comics fit? So I had to make sure that all that stuff fit into that existing map. I'm nuts. It's the only way I can describe it. But so yeah, so pretty much everything that has ever appeared in the comics over many, many decades is on that map now. We found the right place to put it, which again makes it this cool, cohesive Flash Gordon role-playing universe.
That's a level of basically cryptography that I'm somewhat astonished by, because I personally am awful at it. When it comes to reverse engineering, like, okay, where did these events happen and how should they go on a map? I'm awful at that. So I am curious, and we don't have time to do it now, but at some point I would love to try and figure out what got you to the point where you're good at that, because I'd like to be good at that someday too.
We can do an off-camera thing sometime. We'll just have a little sit down. And I don't know if it's necessarily that I'm good at it, but it does get to the point where you just say, this has to be right.
Right.
You just have to, that's as far as I have to go with this. Because otherwise it's going to be a lot of restless nights, and that's not so good.
So yeah, that leads us into Moons of Mongo, where, you know, I think you had a little bit more playing room because they are not as, you know, heavily touched on in the source material as the kingdoms. But also I think, you know, it's another opportunity to do that thing that you've done now multiple times, where you present, you know, these adventures that very well fit that, you know, all those core themes of Flash Gordon, right? Even though you're on a different quote unquote planet, it's still very much that same Flash Gordon feel, and it's the same, you know, pulp adventure, and it's all the same themes. When you sat down and started working on Moons of Mongo, what's kind of the start of, okay, I'm going to write a Flash Gordon adventure? What do you start with? What are the kind of checks that you go through as you're going through to make sure you're still on the right track, and, you know, fleshing that out? What does that whole process look like, making one of those adventures?
Right. Well, I'll just talk about one quick thing before we get to that. So this is another document that I did early on, and this is a 2-pager, and this was all proposed products that I really wanted to see come to fruition at some point. Of course, we haven't done them all, but the very first one is Flash Gordon in Outer Space, and it does mention Exila and Lunita. So I knew that we were going to get to those moons at some point. That was in the cards from the very outset. This document is dated August 14th, 2016, so it's been around a little while. Exila and Lunita are presented in strips that came after Alex Raymond. So we're talking about the mid to late 40s at this point. And this is really where we start to move away from Mongo, and we start to get off into interstellar exploration. I think at that point that maybe it's possible that the audience just really wanted to get off Mongo too. So it was off to space. And it just felt appropriate with doing the booster box to do an expansion which would actually move us away from Mongo a little bit. And the two obvious candidates were the two moons. To be fair, there are references to other moons in other media, but in the strips themselves, we only ever saw Exila and Lunita. I think much later they might have introduced something else, but most of it was unplanetary. So what I needed to do was not only write new adventures off Mongo, but also write adventures that felt like they were written, that they were at least not necessarily written, but based on the material that had been published in the later 40s and starting into the early 50s. So this is why I'm not going to do any spoilers here, but the adversaries now become a little bit more alien. Unlike so many of the adversaries that are in the original strips and a lot of the stuff we had already published for the game, which are more humanoid. They're more just,
right.
They're normal, you know, men and women of, you know, some have longer hair, some have wings, but most of them look like people. I guess the lizard men are slight exceptions to that rule. So this time I was able to sort of go a little bit more wild. But at the same time, when I came up with some of the other adversaries and some of the other things that show up in the adventure, they really do feel like Flash Gordon. I don't know if that makes sense. It has the Flash Gordon feel. So when I designed, there's one particular enemy in the Lunita adventure that you'll encounter, and it could be perfectly suited on Mongo as well as on the moon. And I actually found out a way to bring a monster from Mongo up to one of the moons as well. So that's another way that I could link them together.
I'm trying to figure out which one you're talking about, and the only thing I'm going to say to try and give myself a clue, the ones that are related to the piece of art that is the horn, is that the ones you're talking about?
Yes.
Okay, I know what you're talking about now.
But so yeah, I mean, doesn't that feel like it would be on Mongo? I mean, it really feels like
exactly.
a flash gordon adversary, or an opponent. I'm not even gonna say what it is, but so yeah, so it really was. While I was writing off planet, while I was writing stuff that would feel fresh and new and a little bit more advanced with the storytelling, I still always kept in my mind the vision of our main characters, and not necessarily Flash or Dale or Zarkov or our comic characters, but I always think about our archetypes. How do our archetypes fit into these new settings? And I think it works quite well, I have to say. I think, and then another thing that's cool is if you pick up the Flash Gordon role-playing game, there's a lot of background content about the comics and about the history of Flash Gordon. And I was sort of able to carry that on a little bit too. So you get a nice little introduction in the front of the book, which will tell you a little bit about Exel and Lunita if they're completely new to you. So yeah, I really feel like it's 100% compatible with everything else that we've released, while still taking steps to sort of take things off into a whole new direction.
Real quick, thank you, Troy 1989. Subscribed 2 months with Prime. Great to see it. But yeah, so I'm gonna do a little bit of high level kind of predicting of what I feel like the brass tacks. This is the process that you had to go through. So starting with okay, what content do I already have to pull, right? Either from the comics already or any basically pre-production is how I would probably describe it for knowing that this is something that you're going to one day want to cover in a book. Think about, okay, how are the archetypes and the characters going to interface with those new elements that are unique to this part that we're going to, and then build the outline of what conflict and drama can there be that loops in all of those elements. And then from there, it's just, adding in the drama and tension and the hooks that makes it the job of the GM as easy as possible with the actual rest of the text of the adventure.
Absolutely. Yeah. I think that all works. That nails it. And at the same time, I also wanted to drop certain things into these adventures that we hadn't done before. For example, there's an opportunity for some gamers are going to be like, what? There's an opportunity for essentially a hex crawl. Which is I put into one of the adventures, and I thought, hey, why not? I mean, it's unexplored. Actually, the amusing thing is that Lunita has 2 nicknames that are tossed out in the comics. One is the Hidden Moon, and another one is the Unexplored Second Moon. So when I saw that, I said, well, there's got to be a way for the heroes to go off and explore it, and not necessarily worry about moving from kingdom to kingdom like you would be with Mongo. So in this case, right, I really wanted to present an environment where the GM could just say, you know what, I think over here is where the caterpillar people live. There are no caterpillar people in my adventure, just letting you know. But you know what I mean? If it gives a little bit more freedom to be able to step away from Mongo, which is pretty tight. I mean, we mostly know what's on the surface of Mongo. And now, actually, thanks to my the adventure I included with the Game Master screen, we kind of know what's happening underground too, because I did Journey to the Center of Mongo, but which was another reason to get off Mongo. I had already gone underground and on the surface, so we had to get off.
Well, and that's something also that I think I think there's kind of 2 routes that a GM can go with it when they're working on this stuff. So number one, right, now you've got, okay, here I can go, if I've got these cool things that I think would make sense in Flash Gordon, and that is, the thing I as a GM am introducing, right? Because I think your job as the designer of the system was to allow people to engage in the fantasy and to have the stuff that they fell in love with be in their game. But the GM is more like those folks that did their own versions of Flash Gordon later, right? They get to recontextualize Flash Gordon and the things that are important to them. And so the GM gets to add in a whole bunch of new stuff that would not be in anybody else's version of Flash Gordon. And I think that especially is I love the way that you described it, that there's a hex crawl in the adventure on Lunita, because those are the elements where, for a GM who wants to be as close to Flash Gordon as possible but hasn't had the opportunity to inject their own stuff and be as creative, Lunita is the perfect playground for that.
Absolutely perfect. And the other thing too is that, oh, sorry to interrupt, but the Exila adventure is also something that I never touched on in Flash Gordon, and that's basically what I've done is I've created a noir investigative adventure. It's no spoilers, but so you're actually doing something that really hasn't existed in any of the stuff we've done in Flash Gordon. Most of it has been, hunt down things, fight monsters, try to, thwart Ming's plans. But in this case, I kind of wanted to go off slightly a little left a little bit and introduce something that we hadn't seen before.
Yeah, honestly, the way I keep thinking of it, and I haven't verbalized this before, but I really think of Moons of Mongo as maybe this is a somewhat uncharitable way to say it. I don't know how to say it better, but it's a palate cleanser. I've gotten used to the tempo of the Flash Gordon adventures, and I want to throw something at my players that's really different. Either Moon has, even though you provide some stuff to link them together, you don't have to, and they work siloed, and it's a great, I want to do something that I haven't done running from any of the other adventures before. Right. And that's really, I think Moons of Mongo is great for that. And if I was doing a longer campaign, that's probably how I would handle it, is silo the two and have them interjected, so that way my players kind of get a bit of a reset and a bit of a different taste.
And I mean, ultimately, real quick, but ultimately, it also just shows that you can take your players off the planet, which could open it up to game masters going off in all sorts of crazy directions, and maybe they didn't feel comfortable cattail doing that prior to Moons of Mongo.
Yeah, that I also think is often ends up being a lot of the job of the designers, to just give the GM permission to do something, right. And this is just more permission. But Kristen Serrano asked, with Flash Gordon as a precursor to some Suede design elements, what new Suede mechanics from other settings would you bring into Flash Gordon if you could?
Wow.
So I direct you a little bit to upstream when we talked about some of the things that Flash Gordon did that then went into Suede. But I imagine, you ask any writer, any designer, any creative, honestly, it's time for your cat to be on screen.
I know.
They are certainly loathsome creatures, but are also the best things in the world. But you ask anybody who is a creative, and there's always things that they want to go back and fix, right? It's the saying is, you never finish a project, you just run out of time on it. So I'm going to kind of hijack Christian's question to not only what are some Suede things that you would inject into Flash Gordon, but also what are some things that you would love to go back and touch up on and kind of do over if you could. So answer Christian's question first, and then mine.
That's tricky, because there already was a lot of crossover, which we discussed earlier, and I guess there's just been such a synthesis of adapting stuff into. I mean, I guess it would just be a matter of updating certain things. I'm trying to think. No, because we even put that in. I was thinking about the power mods and stuff, and we wound up doing that in Flash as well. We introduced all that. There's not a lot, Christian, I have to say. I think for the most part, I mean, I think we have everything in there that sort of needs to be there, and I don't think there's somebody else might have to step in this case, because I don't know if there really is anything that I feel like we would need to bring in, because I do feel like it's pretty much all there already. I don't know if that answers your question. It doesn't answer your question at all. I mean, but
well, it's one of those things where, especially you've worked on a bunch of this different stuff, and as both the editions have evolved as well as within each edition, And so it becomes very hard to delineate. Like,
Right.
oftentimes, you might point at something and say, yeah, I've been doing that the whole time. We just didn't call it that name. And this is the same thing. Like talking with Sean about riffs, and their iconics versus the class edges that we did in Savage Pathfinder. It's like, hey, is it that different? No, we've kind of already done that, and that happens with everything.
Right.
But so now it's time to answer my question, which I, of course, am much more interested in because I'm selfish. What are the things that you would go back and, either redo or just edit or add that you weren't able to in the original? We can, to make it a little easier, let's limit it just to the Flash core rules, because if we say everything, then
right.
that we would do the moon and more.
I mean, a lot of it is just I kind of wish that we had more room to just add more material. I would like to elaborate, on more vehicles and more. We covered everything. I wanted to make sure there was land, sea, and air vehicles and rockets. I mean, they're all in there. But there's certainly more stuff that I think would be a lot of fun to elaborate on. Oh boy, I mean It's weird because, again, I said earlier that it's sort of that round hole, round peg thing, and I really feel like I got almost everything in that I wanted to be in there for this book. The only thing is like, some of the old proposed side projects. I mean, maybe additional playable races is always fun, but we of course have the race generator is in there, so you can go ahead and make your own if you want. Yeah, I don't know, Donald. That's a tricky one, because I mean, we wrote so much content between Kingdoms of Mongo and the core book. I mean, that's hundreds of pages of material, and then of course the Game Master screen, and we did the cliffhanger supplement. We've done a bunch of side adventures that have also introduced new stuff, and then of course now Moons of Mongo. So I really feel like we've covered so much of it, and I don't feel like there's anything really missing at this point. It's weird to be like, oh, I'm fine with it. It's good to go.
I am supremely jealous. That has to feel amazing. Because I think
there probably was stuff in the original manuscript that we wound up cutting just for space.
Right.
But I've mercifully
the bane
purged
of working
that.
on print games.
Yes, exactly. I mean, I'm working on a manuscript right now, and it's like pushing 90,000 words, and it's like, I can't tell you what it is. And yeah, there's a lot of stuff that I know we're going to have to pull in the end. But so yeah, I'm sure there's little bits and pieces that at the time I would have been comfortable, I would have been happy to have left in. Off the top of my head, though, I can't remember some of that stuff. I'll be sure to share it down the line, maybe on social media or something, if I ever dig into the old manuscripts, because there were at least 15 drafts or something like that. So
yeah. Well, I mean, that's a great thing, right? You've got the definitive Flash Gordon role-playing game experience, and to have gotten everything in, I mean, it's very, I think, very rare in our industry to be able to say, job done. we did everything, and to not leave anything big on the table. So that's hats off to you. That's a testament to I think the dedication and the very, I think, I mean, tactical, I think is a good way to say it, tactical decision of what things to do. Because, I mean, core rules, hitting everything, and then really diving in deep on Kingdoms of Mongo, even going to the center and journey of Mongo, and now kind of hitting the fringe stuff with Moons of Mongo. It's, I don't know that you could figure out a different way to do a different set of products that would have as much breadth for Flash Gordon as you folks have figured out.
Yeah.
So the fact that it's it's definitive, I think it's a testament to the work done.
Yeah, I mean, apart from expanding the universe, there really isn't much more I think we could have done to really make it feel like it's part of like it is Flash Gordon.
Yeah, because the only thing I can think of that you mentioned earlier is, oh, let's go back to Earth. But even then, right, I think a substantive amount of the work would be figuring out, okay, they touched on that in the existing content, but let's expand that out to what you would have in a supplement in a source book. And that's, I think, that whole getting to play in the sandbox.
Yeah.
Now that you've so thoroughly made everything for the sandbox that exists.
Yeah, and I
So
have
if
one document real quick. I have a variety of other things we could have done where we potentially could do with it. One involves time travel. Anyway, go on.
well, so I was just gonna say, we're reaching the end of our time here. We always go a few minutes over. If any folks have any last minute questions, feel free to throw them out. So Flash Gordon, the Legends of Mongo booster box set, is on Game On Tabletop for another.
It's till the.
It gives me the 8 of 17, so that's 9 days, 9 more days. This goes until, and this is the one thing I don't like about Game On Tabletop is there's no option to change the time zone. It tells you everything in French times. So 3/6/21 at 2100 hours France time.
6/3/21 our date. June 3rd.
Yeah. Yeah. It's the one thing. We can change everything else. We could show you the weight in pounds, we can give you the dimensions in inches, we can give you it in US dollars, but we can't change the date that it shows us.
I'll show you one thing before we dash off. I mocked up some of the our cardstock figures, and I wanted to kind of show them off. And I mean, granted, these are going to be on much thicker cardstock, but we have there's our Constrictosaurus, epic 2-sided beast. Here's a lion man or lion woman. I don't know. That's not very focused, but you can see these are going to be so cool. And of course, this is for those of you who are fans of the Flash Gordon movie. You can't really see it very well, but there's a guy in a black robe with a gold mask, so you can put those pieces together and figure out who that is or what that is.
I just used my noodle. I looked at if I go to the preview page. So you folks at home, when you go to the Flash Gordon Legends of Mongo booster box set page, it does tell you the time localized to you. It just doesn't on the back end for us. So until the 3rd at noon. Right. So that's for both Scott and I, despite the fact that we are technically in places that should be in different time zones. We're both in Pacific right now because Arizona doesn't do time zones. So if you are on the East Coast, then that's going to be 3 p.m. your time. I also realize that it betrays us. So something that we did both on this and ETU for the folks that like to back the last minute is we put the end time at noon 01 because we always have folks that they want to be the last backer and then they miss it by a minute. And we added that minute in for that, but I realized it shows you that minute. So it shows you the exact time. So we've defeated our own purposes.
They're going to want to get in at 12:01.
Yeah, exactly. So Legends of Mongo inside, like Scott just showed, it's 144 of the full color pawns. It's over 40 pieces of unique art. You also have the 12 archetype cards, which we are going to have a preview that is going to go out today. That's going to have some of the descriptive text and show the full spread, art not final, as with everything, because until it goes to the printer, nothing's final. And you also have a printed version of the conversion guide. And we're going to do another pass through to make sure that we've dotted all the I's. So that way you have everything you need. And the 32-page source book for the Moons Exilla and Lunita, written by our guest here, Scott Woodard. You can get all of those in digital, in print. It's all in the one box set, and you also have options for the do-it-yourself VTT asset. So I remember Grasshopper was asking about VTT. If you want to play with Flash Gordon stuff in a VTT as soon as possible, you'll want to get that VTT pledged here because that gets you everything packaged in a way that's useful for VTT. Right, so that's maps without grids on it. That is the pawns in a way that's actually usable for import into VTT, because the print files and the PDF files, like the print files, are actually closer to what you want for a VTT. But there's also a whole bunch of guides and stuff that we put on there, and like little notations so that the printer can double check the color syncing and whatnot. So we kind of have to do this weird intermediary step. But so if you want that stuff as suited for your game as possible, go ahead and get the VTT tier. And then if this is your first touch with Flash Gordon, you want to get everything, the best value is the Champion of the Wild Planets tier, which Scott rate. I came up with that name, trying to figure out what was a good type tier. What's out of 10 stars? How would you rate that name as being appropriate for Flash Gordon?
Let's
Be honest.
About 6, but only because there are not too many other wild planets. But it works for me.
Oh wait a minute. Wait a minute. Did I say S? Oh no, I did. We did. I think at one point it was Champion of the Wild Planet, and I think I added an S in there at some point by accident.
That's okay.
And now it's on the art.
It works. We got moons. We got other planets.
I think that was the where that came up, is like, well, we're talking about moons.
Okay, but it's just bumped up to a 9 out of 10.
But so you can get all that on Game On Tabletop. Scott, thank you so much for coming on Design Corner. It was a blast to have you. Maybe we'll have you on sometime in the future to dive a little more deep into some elements of Flash Gordon. Depends on what your very busy schedule looks like, doing all the wonderful things that you do.
Well, thanks for having me on. That was great.
It was a fantastic experience. And as always, if folks have any questions that we didn't get to, that they didn't get to ask on this live stream, or if you're watching the VOD, feel free to, if you're recently watching the VOD, or when this goes up on YouTube, go ahead and check out the comment section on the campaign and go ahead and ask your questions there or on social media. And also, Scott will be on the Savage Cast tomorrow night with the man behind the curtain himself, Chris Landauer, and Chris Fuchs as well. So you'll have to suffer through talking to those two.
Oh, the pain. The pain.
Well, it was great having you. See you folks later. Before also the actual play, you will see a brief appearance as Scott prepares our intrepid adventurers at the start of the AP before we see whether or not our wonderful cast can survive the sinister machinations of GM Cheyenne Wright, who I am led to believe, and have been told repeatedly, and will be disappointed if it doesn't come up, does a fantastic Ming impersonation. So check that out on Wednesday. Landauer, before I try and sign off again, is there anything else I'm missing? You folks can't see it, but in our back end, I can see his little face, and his face is little, not his. Has a little face. I wasn't trying to indirectly insult him there, and he's shaking his head no. So it was a blast. Thank you so much for your questions. We'll be back at some point when there's an interesting topic to talk about with Design Corner. Until then, see you folks later.